Okay, welcome back. And as I said a few moments ago, for this next segment, we're going to be joined with a guest, a longtime friend of mine, David Bothe, who you see right here. How are you doing today, David?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to be here too. I, though, am here in an interesting way this time. Most of my videos in this series is on the rooftop of the building I live in. The photo behind me, I decided I would use one of those fancy Zoom backgrounds. It's a photo that I took several months ago down in the Corcora Valley in Colombia. And so I'm sort of, I guess, here and there now. So anyway, though the sounds you may hear outside from time to time, as I say at the beginning of some of these videos, I can't control the fact that I do live in a downtown area of a highly touristic area of Playa del Carmen, Mexico. So with all that out of the way, David, it's good to see home, I guess I could say. You know, you're in Athens, Georgia, where we first met. I believe it was probably, I think it was like 2014. I remember one time I went back and tried to figure out when it was. It was during the times of my sickness when I was pretty cognitively out there. Yeah. But and I'm going to mention a little bit about some of that as we go. But since that time, you know, you and I have worked together in a number of ways, and a lot of shamanic journeys. Different kinds of ceremony, whether they were directly shamanic or not, you know, and then having all the crystal bowls and the big collection of crystal bowls that you have. And then, of course, all the goddesses, all of our women friends that we had in what we call our tribe, you know, they would do their oracle decks and all kinds of things, you know, and it was a really fantastic time. And I'm not saying wasn't as is not today, but during that time, there were so many people in Athens, it seemed, around those years, you know, 15 up to the, well, again, they still might be there, but I know a certain amount of them have moved on. But it's a very, very rich spiritual tradition town with nobody really, any one thing, nobody claiming to be, you know, I am shaman, I am this, I am that, you know, we did certain things. You and I actually worked with another individual in looking into the oldest versions of shamanism that you have in the Nordic experience with Sather. And those were some interesting
it was a rich time with a wonderful confluence of bright spirits that treated us all really well. Good times.
Exactly.
Good times.
And you know, seeing the light and the things on your candles back there, for people for people that were maybe to go back and look at my Instagram posts from, you know, a year and a half ago, you'd see how my old home in Athens was decorated with an enormous amount of all kinds of spiritual type things. And you were mentioning a second ago beforehand my rattles that I would use when we would do our journeys. And, you know, it's one thing I have to use a recorded rattle on the journeys here. And, you know, I mean, you were talking a minute ago about how the experience of those rattles and those two rattles that each had their own story to them and how much power they, I think, brought to the entirety.
They did. And that being said, magic is one of those things, or efficacy when it comes to journeys. You appreciate it when it's there and you use what you have when you don't. And so I've had some successful journeys that reminded me of the journeys that you ran with those rattles. And I was like, oh, well, this isn't quite as good as that, but it's just fine. Thank you very much. You know?
Well, we won't get into comparisons. I did see a funny thing about this. I was looking when I was preparing the course. I was listening to one of the oldest audio recordings I had of Shamanic Journey from somebody from way back. And she was talking about how when she was traveling, she would use her pills. She had a prescription, and I went and did that. And I was like, you know, and think of the enormity of that. You know, here's the medicine that I take for my transplanted liver after getting past cancer. So I mean, that's powerful right there. I mean, yeah, it's a synthetic thing from some pharmaceutical company, but the sound, I mean,
the rhythm,
I almost did it for this course. I almost used my transplant medication as the rattle sound, and perhaps I will. You know, maybe that's the sign that I need to do that. But
the beauty with this type of spiritual practice is that you can experiment safely.
Exactly, and I talked a lot about that.
And if it doesn't work,
I mentioned
it doesn't work. So
It's,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and it really comes down to the two main topics that we want to talk about here today. That nothing is really ever there's not a right and wrong way of doing these kinds of these practices, particularly when it comes to things like shamanism that are very individual. You can cultivate it in your own way. But when you're talking about things like shamanism, you're talking about, you're using your soul, you're getting out of your conscious mind, you're leaving your heart through in your soul, and you're entering into the spirit world. And so joy and gratitude are the topics that, we're going to talk about now that we're finally announcing the title. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking beforehand what exactly joy means, and I saw two versions of it. And it is so much like the difference between thinking with your head, thinking with your heart, because of the one joy was, simple pleasures of sitting on the beach, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And then it actually had another one. It said biblical version of joy. And when I see biblical, naturally, I'm like, okay, here we go, organized religion. But if you can drop that ego part of it and just go towards the divinity of it, they're talking about divinity now. Right. And that was what we are. Your soul is your divinity that comes into this and creates your consciousness in the way that I talked about it here. And when I first encountered you in 2014, you had Hope in Haven was your program that you were, you were doing with people. And it seemed like every other word you used was the word joy when I went and attended these things. And you talked a lot about gratitude. So I don't have really a direct question, but, the ways sort of maybe recreate the way that you talk about it in your presentations about the importance of joy and what it is.
So I'm ready to hop right in, and we're approaching this from the perspective of someone who's learning shamanic journeying as a tool for healing or self-awareness or expansion. Steve and I actually met over a program I was running that helped veterans overcome war trauma. And all kinds of healings are possible within that. And shamanic healing is one of the ones that's very effective for people that need soul retrievals or need to integrate some of the difficulties. And so what we want to do today is talk lightly about some of the challenges that come with shamanics and some of the rewards. And why am I doing this? And more importantly, okay, now that I know the basics, how am I actually going about it? The lever I want to use to access joy and gratitude is hope. We're engaging shamanics in order to heal, in order to learn about ourselves, in order to connect with our higher self or our guides that are going to help us become our most actualized or best, highest and best, if you will, self. It's a journey. It has prices. It can be done skillfully, or it can be done as a mess, and all that doesn't matter, because in the long run, whatever your path is, you're gonna end up where you need to be. And sometimes the messy parts of the path are the most important parts. And so that's where baseline hope comes in. We're engaging because we are called to, or we have to engage this, or we choose to. And the other side of that hope is, may we not get led astray. If we do take detours or something that there are forms of protection that we're not going to focus on in this lecture, but there are needs to be protected. There are needs to align with what you're trying to connect with. And so hope is kind of the common theme between the entire endeavor. I choose to be better, and I'm going to do this in the hope that we will be better. Wherever you're at, no matter how much you're hurting, how confused, how clear you are, joy and gratitude are kind of the servants of skillful practice. They are antidotes for the difficulty. There's a lot of harshness out there. There's a lot of unclarity. There's a lot of harm. We carry a lot of that, and our shamanic practices help us heal that. We heal it, in my experience, more quickly and more efficiently when we engage in cultivating joy, and when we notice beauty, and when we call it gratitude for what we've already got. We can do all kinds of high quality releases and high quality forms of alchemy with It's very simple joy and gratitude, especially when you learn how to apply them to the leading edge of where you're at. And so one of the practices that I used with veterans was a practice called the 3 C's: courage, curiosity, and compassion. And which of those do you need most in this moment? And then you apply it. And so if you're foggy, you might need some curiosity. If you're scared, you might need some compassion, and you might need some courage. If you're if there's doubt, doubts are normal and natural, and we want everybody to have some doubt, but we can't let doubt become crippling. And so that's essentially, it's the same thing with anything anything we're using. We have to find the right balance for us. And so somebody else's balance may show you what's close to your balance, but rarely does it show the perfect version of it. And so if you're engaging in shamanic journeys and you bring in hope as a guiding principle, and you bring in joy and gratitude as the ways that you understand what's happened, or you use it for clarity, or you use the 3 C's, I'm beginning my practice and I need courage, because there's going to be some scary stuff. I was contemplating, shamanics always involves a price. And the prices vary from person to person. One of the simplest prices you may have to give up is an illusion or a belief that no longer serves you. And so it's being able to let go of a piece of consciousness, a story, or an assumption. That's a big part of the shamanic journey. Also being able to deflect the doubt or criticism of others. Where the rubber hits the road, your shamanic journey requires you to listen to your guides. It is between you and them. Your teacher can direct you in a certain direction. They can help hold the space. They can get your brain to the place where the shamanic journey is possible. But what actually happens is between you and either the spirit world, your guides, your angels, your demons, your past, whatever shows up for you. And so joy and gratitude can lead to clarity, and they can lead to kind of an attunement where you're bringing more of the high quality stuff to you and less of the stuff that may be the stuff that we need to be protected from.
Sorry. Are you seized? You might, it looks like David's connection might be interrupted. It's still recording. We may have to start over. We'll see what happens. I'll wait to see if he rejoins. David, if you can hear me here, I'm gonna message you on my phone. I'm gonna pause.
Okay, so here's
and just like that,
we're back.
David was in the middle of saying something, and he was talking about something that I want to talk about in a later chapter, and I was going to somehow acknowledge that, and so, but I accidentally interrupted him, and I realized that, and he stopped. And then I apologized for interrupting it, and I realized he didn't stop. His screen was frozen. But the funny thing is, now that we managed to get reconnected, that we were pointing out that this is the synchronicity of our thoughts, I guess, at times like this. Because he later said that he was about to change the topic altogether. And so we were both about to do that. And so maybe we needed to reset. And you were talking about the highs and lows there for a second when we were getting ready for this.
So Steve and I have been through a lot of journeys together on a lot of different levels. And if you look at his face right now, he's beaming, and that's the joy. That's the essence of the joy that we're trying to not capture and contain and hold, but just visit. And when it's here, you really enjoy it. And so then that sparks gratitude, and the joy and gratitude sparks more joy. And so just for so walking out of the didactic or the left brain or the learning for a second, Steve and I are having a lot of fun doing this. And that is a byproduct of being true to yourself and following your callings. And in the short answer, when you connect with your guides, good things happen. And so, ta-da. And then I was saying, Steve and I are both a little bit ADHD, and I can follow him just like he's a orchestrator. He's a conductor of an orchestra, and sometimes he's playing a bass line, and sometimes there's a full aria, and sometimes somebody is singing, hitting the real high note. And it for me, it brings a ton of joy. And we do channel it mostly because we channel the same guides. And so if you find people that can connect on your wavelength, you cultivate them. You make it's a rich experience, and you allow for it, and it will make your journey a little less lonely. because a shamanic journey can be solo. At its core, it is solo. But if you can find somebody that's visited some of the same spirits or talked to some of the same influences, then gratitude and joy naturally follow. And clarity comes as a little, and possibly even validation. They're wanting me, the guides are saying, mention validation. You have to be your ultimate validator of what you experienced. Your experience is your own. Your teacher can hope for a certain type of thing, or you can set an intention for something. What actually happens is what you want to pay attention to, and you want to allow for it, because you're going to have highly magical journeys and you're going to have duds, and that's okay. And there's going to be certain types of magic that you're not looking for that's going to show up. And this is the magic, or this is the medicine. We'll use the term medicine. This is the medicine that you need. And that, it's like, oh, I want the Black Panther totem. It's like, no, you need the groundhog totem, or you need the skunk totem, or you need the crow. You know, it's like, why can't I have eagle? Why can't I have owl? Because you have crow. And so work with the totems that show up. Work with the medicine that shows up. Okay. Refocusing. So I promised one of the spirits that's coming through in this dialogue, we have to have moments of simplicity and clarity. And so if you are learning shamanics, then it all happens in the present moment. And that is such a cliche, but you have to be able to push away everything else to be able to listen. You have to be able to let your brain get out of its normal chatter, which the drums and the rattles and intention and prayer and focus all help with. And then when you're there, you have to be. And that's a skill that's just not taught very much. You get to be a little bit of an observer in our culture, at least in American culture. And very so once you're there, you just be/become, but you are in this state that's altered. And something is happening. You're receiving some information, you're receiving a perspective, you're letting go of something. And for a ton of holistic healing on any level, shamanic or otherwise, you got to let go. You got to let go of the hurt, you got to let go of the trauma, you got to let go of the illusions, you got to let go of the emotional baggage, you got to let go of the stories. And once you let go, new stuff can come in. And that's where the gratitude comes in, because once you've released, it's like, okay, there's this. And even I was working with a Tantrika practitioner this morning that was talking about how rage had created room for more pleasure. And so be careful about how you judge, but mostly she had just cleared. The rage was burning up some of the self-imposed limitations that the angels talk about as part of the human experience. And our job as spiritual practitioners is to free ourselves from our illusions, our limitations, and rage is actually occasionally, it's one of any deep felt emotion can break those bonds, as well as intention, like dance. If you do ecstatic dance, or if you've ever done shamanic dance, then that synergy of movement and breath and intention can transfigure you. It can take you up high if that's where you need to go, or it can break through some of those limitations. There's lots of ways to break through limitations. And if you do it with gratitude, etc. So that's a little aside. And now, once again, I'm going to try and simplify for just a second. So one full breath in for everybody. Wherever you're at on your shamanic journey, the invitation in this moment is to call up first gratitude. Because if you're watching this video, then either you're a journeyman or a master or an apprentice, and there's some nugget here for you, something you already know that you need to be reminded of, or something that you need to learn and you need to have reinforced, or, oh, this is the one piece that I need. And so I am grateful for that dynamic. A lot of people, so I want to talk just for a moment about shamanic illness. A lot of people are forced into shamanic approaches because it's the only thing left to help them heal what is unhealed. And so I can have a lot of gratitude for the shamanic illnesses that I've experienced that have been difficult or devastating. My friend Steve has been through shamanic illnesses that make mine pale. And I'm very grateful that he walked those paths so I don't have to.
You're a large part of it.
He paid those prices, but he also reaps the rewards. And so if you have a harsh price to pay, then assume that there's a reward, even if it may not be like you want it to look like. It's going to be a reward on the soul level. And so that's the thing. Over most every shamanic practitioner I've worked with has always at some point come to the understanding that I'm better off, even though I had to pay a price, even though it's difficult, even though, yeah, it's like, who would I be if I had not done this? Well, I would have been that limited self. I would have been that hurt self. I would have been so small. I would have been bound up by my illusions and my judgments. And now you're free. And so if in ancient cultures, the shaman were not the best athletes. They often were deformed. And there's this theory that if you had a clubbed foot or a hunched back, automatically that puts you a little more in line with the spirit realm than if you were straight and upright, if you were the jock athlete, if you were the whatever. And so if you are completely straight, completely upright, and completely healthy, you're going to have to work harder to have high quality shamanic journeys, not necessarily mystical journeys, but shamanic journeys, because pain is part of the process. Pain is it's a driver, and in the long run, so that's kind of, we're showing, if we're returning to hope for a second, the hope of being out of pain, or at least transmuting the pain, is often an unconscious driver for shamanic issues. And so if that's you, be aware, be grateful, you're not alone, and know that there are silver linings. Because I wouldn't wish what Steve went through on anybody. I wouldn't wish what I went through on anybody, but I kind of get it. At the end of the discussion, it's like, oh, right now I'm free. And so, and that's a hard term to describe. When you get there, you'll know it. And until you get there, I would invite you to set your intention. May I find some freedom? And it can look like peace. It can look like not being triggered. It can certainly look like making peace with your process. I am working through right now types of arthritis in my hips. And I did yoga for 12 years, thinking that I would keep my hips open. And now either genetics or something has caused inflammation in my hips to where I can't sit cross-legged. And that's where my shamanic training is perfect. It's like, oh yeah, you're just a little lame. That makes you, that makes it easier for you to connect. And more importantly, the one of the greatest gifts of the shamanic experience is your experience is your own. And so I can be a very powerful and effective yogi even if I can't sit cross-legged, because that's not the essence of yoga. Sitting cross-legged it may look yoga, sitting, with your in the mudras, etc., namaste. All those things they're an integral part, and they're important, but they're also not the essence. And so if someone ever says, and so one of the things that I think people should protect themselves from in shamanics is the judgment of others. If anyone says, well, you can't be a shaman because you don't look like this, or you don't speak like this, or you haven't gone to this training, or you haven't been certified by this type of teacher, that's all crap. Either you are working with the spirit realms and medicine and healing and awareness is coming through when you journey or when you connect, or it's not. And and none of the other human stories matter. And so please protect yourself from the judgment of others. If you have a wonderful experience on a journey, own it, write it down, cultivate it, absorb it. And if you have a dud, who cares? It wasn't the journey of the moment. It wasn't either what your healing required, or it was preparing you for something else, or it just wasn't right for you. And so especially what I call, and I don't know if Steve wants to own this, but what we used to call cookie cutter journeys, where people would have a formula, and the formulas work sometimes. And when they don't work, there's nothing wrong with you. You just didn't need the formula at that time. And I've been through, and so that's one way where I'm going to pre-validate your experience. If you go through a formulaic journey, we're going to find our guide, we're going to enter the middle realms, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then we're going to come out. If that works, then assume that that's what you needed. And if something else happens, assume that's what you needed, and trust your experience. Because when the rubber hits the road, nobody else can validate what's happened for you, just you. And perhaps your community if they've had a similar one, but Steve and I have very different. I tend to resonate more on an angelic realm, and Steve tends to. I don't really know where Steve goes, but I enjoy watching it.
It's funny. You and I, maybe around the time of Sather, those days, because now we were really out there. We had never gone that far into such an archaic, old tradition, and actually went out and created the things that we needed, the tools, so to speak. And you said something about how I was involved in too many things, and we were talking about one thing and talking about two things at once. And you said, I forget what you said, but then I said, I replied, I said, well, I think I swim in several seas at the same time. And so that's kind of where I look at it.
Yes.
I can't tell you which one they are or how many
right.
there are.
And it's beaming through in your face right now. And so that's one of the, you can expect as a novice practitioner, or even as a master practitioner, you can expect to have some really mind-blowing, soul-altering journeys that when you return to the vibration of them, you'll look like Steve's face just looked, where it was shining. It was, spirit was flowing through. It's like, there's the joy of this. And that the Sather experience that he's talking about, we had 4 primary practitioners, and I guarantee you all 4 of us had a very different experience. Even if we were in the same room, even if we started with the same intention, part of it was because we were all trying to hold different corners of the expansive practice, if you will, but mostly all just because we needed something different. And it was intensely powerful. I'll go ahead and use the word magic. It's the basis of Nordic shamanism. And we managed to tap into some things that brought excellent things to each of the practitioners, but very different things. And so exactly. And that to me, that's easy. That sparks joy, that sparks gratitude, that sparks hope. My experience is my own. I got what I needed. And that is a catchphrase that you can always test that. Did I get what I need? And sometimes if you have a clunk, if you go through a cookie cutter journey and nothing, your crown chakra doesn't open up, the heavens don't rush in, your angels and guides aren't, massaging your toes. If you have a clunker, then assume that that's what you needed. And if you have one where you're swimming in multiple seas, so I'm going to invite Steve, go back to that moment where your soul was so expanded, where you were swimming in multiple seas. Yeah. If you can see his aura, it's diffusing because it's like going to different dimensions, and it's unplugging his brain a little bit, which is one of the things we really want. And it's beautiful and magical, and it can be witnessed, but it doesn't have to be experienced the way that he's experiencing it, because that's his own. And sometimes you're supposed to share what happens, and sometimes you're supposed to just shut the hell up because it's yours. And other people aren't going to understand it, yeah.
Right. Not to talk too much about that Sather thing, because we never really talked much about it. We weren't even public about it with our group of people that we generally had ceremonies with. But looking back on it, we didn't do it very many times. We made 3 or 4 times. But then there was 4 of us, but all 4 of us were healers or whatever in our own right. One worked a lot with shadow work and things like that, and the other in masculine, feminine dynamics and relationship type love and things like that. And then you and your spectrum of hope and and then of course anything involving the ultimate joy of bliss of happiness of angelic stuff. And then the bowls, your crystal bowls, a vast, very beautiful collection of crystal bowls. And then myself coming from wherever that was. But after we would do these ceremonies, we did share about it. And it was interesting how, without any kind of, 101 sort of mythos coming into it, and me not having to say, okay, everybody, these are the things called the Norns, and these are the things called these gods and these goddesses, whatever. People had some basic understandings of that stuff. But in using that sort of mapped world of Yggdrasil and all that we did in the Nordic thing. And I'll talk more maybe in this course about some of the specifics of that. I know I'm going to talk a little bit about the Celts. We talk about some other issues later in the ways that I have earlier when I compare just certain traditions and the way they might have done it. Again, there's no right or wrong way. It's an individual path. And even the duds that David referred to as be grateful for the experience that you had it. And don't doubt yourself and don't be bummed about it. You didn't do anything wrong. And maybe it wasn't a dud. Why do you believe it's a dud? You can ask yourself even that. You know, you mentioned the price that people pay, and you mentioned, you know, to be a shaman. And I've talked elsewhere about this, and I'm not going to say this every time I have somebody on, but to remind the people watching that if somebody refers to themselves, if they say that I am a shaman, you just need to keep going. Just keep going. Because yes, there are people that are called shamans, right? I've visually seen it, right? And when I was in South America, people that literally live in little villages up in the Andes, and that is what they've done forever. They don't have cell phones, they have any of that, okay? And those people, yes, and they certainly traditions around the world still feature pockets of that. The Sami in northern Siberia and Finland and all that. And then you've got certainly in North America, all across the Americas, and in certain tribal lands. But it's very, very difficult to be the kind of shaman that we talk about in the most purest form of the word. So the majority of people are shamanic practitioners, you know, people that use shamanic practices as they've understood them to do shamanic work. So, you know, that's when when David mentioned you have to be born in to be a shaman, or you have to be deformed or you have to have a shamanic illness, as he referred to it. Yeah. But the most important thing is that you allow yourself to do it and to believe in it and disconnect from this ingrained world that we live in, where everything is good and bad, and just go. Obviously, in this case, with Shamanic Journey, we're talking about a specific way of doing it. So yeah, there's going to be some basic guidelines, but your goal is not to be a shaman. You know, a shaman traditionally was the one that was outside the village for whatever reason. It was the first one that started to think about something other than the animals and the air we breathe and this, and there must be something else. If we're talking about caveman days, cavewoman days, before they even named the gods, before it became spirituality, and then it later became organized religion. We're tapping into that, you know, going through your heart, not through your mind. And so, and I'm going to mention something else real fast here. For a number of years, I was resistant to all of the Eastern esoteric. Not that I want to in any way come across as anti-Hindu or anything like that, but the whole meditation thing and mindfulness and yoga and all that was, to me, I was so infatuated with the Celtic tradition and the Nordic tradition, and I felt that it, you know, maybe it was a little bit of me being a victim. Oh, poor me, you know, my ancestors aren't represented or whatever. But it never through that did I have any criticism of those things. They just weren't for me. That has changed, obviously, because of my new partner for the past since I've been in Colombia on now. She meditates and a lot and does yoga and actually works with shadow work. And so you just mentioned that you've been doing yoga for years. And I remember at times when I was coming back from transplant beforehand, I'd be talking about the physical pain when I rarely did. And you had said a couple of times that if I ever wanted to learn basic yoga stuff, you know, you'd teach me. I never took you up on it. But just last week, I went to my first yoga class, and today, actually, I'm supposed to be there now. I'm going to miss today's. So here you are, 12 years of being all into yoga and everything. And so now you're taking a break and boom, I pick it up. So I guess I'm sort of taking that for us.
Yeah. Well,
I'll let you know how it goes.
You trust divine timing, and you've got a muse that you live with. That's like, okay, and sometimes you follow your muse. So
I even bought a yoga mat. I actually have a yoga mat now, man. I'm enlightened just like that. But
well, you should enjoy the Savasana portion. In certain yoga classes, you kind of work hard for an hour, hour and 15 minutes, and then you journey for some people journey at the end of the practice. And so
what the way that I'm, not to get too into this, but the way that I'm kind of looking at it is that I injured my back post-transplant. I had to get 2 spinal taps at the very base of my spine in the same day. And when I was swimming in Oaxaca about, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, a wave crashed me to the bottom of the ocean, and it literally felt like I was a centipede, and and it was that very same, and there was some significant physical pain around that. And, of course, I thought of all the consciousness things, like how your feelings and emotions are certain parts of your body, and like anger and rage will go to your liver and all this, because I'm familiar with that in years of being sick, and I wasn't really up for trying to figure out how to fix my back consciously. And so I looked into, I also have a thing called neuropathy, which is some nerve damage in my leg from the years of having the hepatitis C that gave me the cancer. Been clear of that as well. But I read about that, and it said there is no cure for it, but that some people find that yoga helps. You gotta be kidding me. Here this wave hits me. I start feeling this pain. I allow myself to gripe about it because it hurts. And then all of a sudden I have this invitation. And so the yogi actually came to my house for our first session together. I talked to him about what was going on specifically. And so he does Jen or Yin, depending on how it's I think it's Y, but here it'd be a J sound. And so I'm in Jen yoga, which is a pretty mellow, but man, in the 2 sessions I've done, it's interesting how, you in those traditions, you're leaving your mind and all this, and they don't match up exactly the same on the way they look at that sort of meditative versus journeying, because journeying, you're not even here anymore. You're not in your physical body. I mean, you can hear the drum. But it's your soul, and so it's treated a little differently. So the way I'm looking at yoga for me is that I'll just do this for the physicality of it and loosen my body up and see what helps. But what happened was, in doing these sessions, I began to almost get into a journey-like phase. And it wasn't like I was in one of our typical, and I say typical for people now in the second week of doing this, journey of where, I'm in a forest or wherever it might be. I'm literally still right there feeling, oh my God, my knee hurts, but because this pose. But other things in my life that are going wrong or whatever, not right, I all of a sudden thought about it in a completely different way, and was able to use that information, and within a day or so make some immediate changes that I can actually see. And I know there's probably a lot of people out there saying, well, duh, that's mindfulness, blah, blah, blah. Well, it took me a while to get there. I've been through a whole lot of things, but I was very impressed, and I'm looking forward to my yoga experience. So don't be looking for a 6 weeks introduction into yoga practice for me anytime soon. If I do that, you can officially put me on this the new age smorgasbord of everything else. And the next thing I'll start reading your tarot cards, and I'll sell you a T-shirt that says I'm enlightened. Yeah, exactly.
And so for your people that are learning their spiritual path, one of the beauties of America is we get to pick and choose. We get to draw a little bit from this and a little bit from that, and purists of any tradition may squawk and howl at it, but hey, we're Americans, and we get to choose what works, and you can trust your divine timing that things will unfold as they should. And if you have what I call a calling to do shamanic journeying, or if you have a calling to do yoga, then you show up and you do those practices in the best way that you can, and you keep a little bit of your core individuality. And so there are cults all over this world that everything from religious cults to spiritual cults to you name it, everything from cults of personality to literally cults. And to me, those are to be avoided because they don't respect our individuality enough. And so, but no judgment if it's a path, if it's what you need in the moment. But that being said, keep a little bit of reserve of, is this working for me? And that's
Right.
necessary for shamanic journeys. Is this the kind of practice? Is this the kind of medicine? Does this actually fit me? And then
Right.
you've got to use a curiosity practice, because sometimes it's hard and that means it fits you. And sometimes it's hard and it means, oh no, this is just a silly waste of your time. And so wherever you're at in that process, discernment. Yeah.
Discernment. Yeah. And then truth. We'll be
Yeah.
more about that later. One thing, and I sort of distracted myself by saying the discernment. You had mentioned, I've lost it. So it sounded like somebody was going to knock on my door, and then you said something else, and I lost my next train of thought on the question. The shamanic journeying, and I forgot it. We can talk amongst ourselves for a minute. Good time to go to the bathroom. No,
well, actually, that sparks my angels and guides to have for a deep gratitude and a deep joy practice. Hold the thought, because I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and then and so not knowing is an incredible blessing. Not knowing is a powerful lever to actually figuring out what you really need to know. Mm-hmm. And we want our answers now. We want our answers yesterday. And one of the beauties of shamanics is it teaches you to be patient and let the answers unfold. And holding the question is actually how you get your answers. Because like my children, I have 3 teenage daughters, and every once in a while they'll ask me a question and it'll go in one ear and out the other. And that's human. That happens to everybody. Sometimes if you work to get the answer, you get to hold it a little differently than if somebody just presents it to you. Oh, the meaning of life is to, experience joy on this plane, to evolve, to feel everything, to be fully human. And, you got to live that. You got to live that for that to make sense. And so what I would like to offer is I have one of my, you've mentioned the crystal bowls a few times. I would like to do a little micro journey. And so, why talk about journeying when you can actually journey? Or in your nice case, remember the cool journeys that we had.
So before we start, I remember what it was going to say. You were talking about your calling.
Yep.
Okay, calling. Now, people can have all kinds of ways of looking at that, but I mention a lot that the body never lies and the mind does, right? And if we think of divinity and messages coming to us through divinity, that means it's coming to us through our soul, which means it's coming from our heart, which is where most of our emotional responses come through in our conscious memory, right? So if you feel like that's something you want to do, that intuition, you could say, could also be a form of, that's where that's coming from too. I'm not trying to say you have to say that you never came up with anything. Everything is given to you by some calling or some spirit or some whatever coming to you. But on its base, on how the body never lies and the mind does, when you have a good instinctual feeling about something, you want to do it, that is probably, that calling could be coming from a much deeper place than just simple curiosity.
Absolutely.
And that's when you begin to become connected to, how many times you walk into a room, and I'm not talking about anything as far as race or politics, but say there's a few people in the room and all of a sudden one person just sort of rubs you wrong. You don't know why. You have no idea why. There's something there. That doesn't mean you have to be a jerk, but it also doesn't mean that, you necessarily have to force yourself into engaging or having a conversation with that person. And I'm not trying to draw any divisiveness between people, but sometimes when you feel something's just not right, for whatever reason, it's okay to go with that. And just like when you feel like it is, and it might be a little bit crazy, like leaving the country, becoming a digital nomad.
That's the calling. So let me say for the newbies, for people that don't have the spiritual practice of calling, if you're developing your spiritual practice of calling, one of the prices that you have to pay to really figure out when it's a calling is callings with a capital C and temptations with a capital T. They look exactly the same until they diverge. They can have 4 or 5 steps where you're on the path of following a temptation, or you're on the path of following a calling. And then at some point, bam, oh my God, that was a temptation. That wasn't a calling. And oh my God, that was a calling. And I'll just easily define calling as a practice, an action, an endeavor, something you have to do or follow up on that's beneficial for you, or that you're better off having done. And, you know, it's in the long run, all of our temptations teach us, but there are temptations, there are paths that we don't have to repeat. And so especially if say for recovery, if you've walked your path of a certain type of substance or a certain type of experience, and the temptation is there for you to repeat that, that's not your calling. That's just an urge to do it. And so a calling is anyway. So enough on callings right now, but do pay attention that when you're talking about intuition, your gut, your wounds can cause feelings that can feel like intuition. Your traumas can cause feelings. And so
that's when it goes from the heart to the brain. Once the brain becomes involved, that's where the lying comes in. And I'm not saying we were liars.
And so you want to be a little cautious when it comes to callings versus temptations, and when it comes to listening to your gut, because when my gut tells me I need to buy every crystal at a crystal shop,
you come home with a trunk load of crystals. I've seen it.
And then I'm grateful for my self-restraint. And I find the balance of, well, what crystal do I need to buy today, if any? And sometimes it's turn around and walk out because the energy's bad. Or sometimes it's like, oh my God, I have to rescue this crystal from this store and it needs to come live with me forever. And it just takes practice. And so that's one of the reasons why Steve and I are very fond of shamanics, is because it's a practice. We don't have to be perfect at it. We can do it, and over time it becomes an art form. And so, there you go. All right, this is so much fun. I hope to be able to do this again. Let's do you think 30 seconds, 1 minute? What do you think is the right amount of time? What is your guide? So maybe we'll do until they say stop.
Whatever you feel is best.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so let's actually do this. So we're going to unplug from our brain before we get started. We're going to align with our highest and best. We're going to invite the proper experience. For me, this bowl is an angelic bowl. And so if your shamanic journeys involve angelics, by all means, invite the right angel to show up. And if it's also sound, the music of the spheres, the vibrations of the universe, there's so much, I'll just use the word magic, that can come on sound. So if it's some other version, it's let your intention be your own. Okay? So and so notice if your consciousness has altered. Notice if there was medicine. Notice if it opened a portal to guides of any stripe, any variety. Notice if it just unplugged your brain. Notice if it evoked joy. And then call it gratitude for your authentic experience. Whatever your experience was in that 45 seconds or so, that's what you needed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to say, the sound of the bowl, for me, didn't come through, so I don't know if people could hear it.
Okay.
You could definitely hear it when you tapped it. And I know if I was sitting there, I could hear the sound it's making when you were doing it. So if anybody wants to hear that and is unfamiliar with that, feel free just to head to Google, just crystal bowl ceremony, and just click on one. That's the kind of sound. But either way, you know, while you were watching it, if you had your eyes open anyway, you could see, and you could hear enough of it to know that the sound was there. And you could hear David's words, and you could see in his expression, aura, whatever you want to call it, the clarity, the purity, that channel to the divinity that we're talking about. How that space, you know, can be cultivated there, and it can be a useful tool. So, you know, maybe we'll figure out how to do another, you know, version where we can get better mic sound. But I don't want to say that it wasn't good enough, because it was perfect. It was just exactly perfect. And
it modeled for your students. It modeled you. They got to watch you, because I've watched you for years make that transformation from everyday Steve to business Steve when it comes to shamanics. And business Steve, there's a switch that goes off, and you unplug your brain and you get into whatever the flow of the moment is. And so I witnessed that. I witnessed you getting into that right space. And even if that right space wasn't, you know, it was what it was, but it was a nice demonstration of right space. And so, yay. And even if the sound didn't come through, then I'm grateful anyway.
Yes, I'm grateful too. And yeah, I mean, and we used to, some of those crystal bowl ceremonies, there'd be 2 people playing them, and like 10 different bowls. And I mean, just amazing times. Well, I said, so yes, joy, in however you choose to define it, very important to have in your life, whether it's the simplest forms of happiness and pleasure, to joy being that of the actual feeling of the connection to the divine. And when we say divine, again, like when he says angels, you know, different traditions, you know, some call them guides, some call them teachers, some call them, you know, this, that, power animals for some. Now, generally speaking, don't want to get too, this is all covered elsewhere in the course. Power animals, you know, more lower world, middle world. More when we speak about more healing spirits and the more angelic, now we're talking about the upper realms. And we'll talk more about that. We've only had the one journey so far. And this week we're going to be back into the middle. I think we're going, actually, I don't know exactly yet. I'm gonna edit this part out. Are you still there? Yeah.
Yep.
I forgot where I'm taking them this week. And in this week's journey, we'll experience something new too.
You know, I bet they're going to go where they need to go.
They're going to go where they need to go. Yes, last in the first one, we introduced journeying itself, and went and tried to meet up with a power animal or a helping spirit or something along those lines, just to get their feet wet, so to speak.
Yep. Good.
As Christy Gray used to say, check your mind whenever you go into her home. At Rockingwood, I talk about her earlier in the video. That's why I could say her name, and of course you know her well as well. She always tells people to leave your head at the door.
Yeah.
And that's exactly.
Yep.
That's great advice. So it's funny you mentioned you had the three teenage daughters, because I guess it's been 2014, which makes it 7 years that we've known each other. It's also interesting that we have the same beard, but that we also have, between the two of us, 7 children. Crazy, isn't it? And I even have a grandchild now.
Congratulations. Woo. Yeah.
I think your beard might be grayer though. So now, if we could just clear up that Georgia Bulldog Auburn Tiger thing, would be perfect, right? A little too much information. But David, thanks a lot for being on today and being here with us. I'm sure people got a lot out of it. There's a lot to get out of it. And you can find David on Facebook, David Bothe. You'll see the way his name is spelled here. You can probably reach out to him there. And I don't really, you don't do you do Hope and Haven isn't really
No, Hope and Haven is I still do holistic healing. I do private sessions and small group activities. But yeah, Hope and Haven, the business end of it closed a couple of years ago, and also the mission became less important because the mission was directly for veterans suffering from war trauma. And as the United States got out of Afghanistan and especially Iraq, there were we went from a very large footprint to a very small footprint, and so the amount of trauma diminished.
right. And the VA. Yeah. Speaking of it as a veteran,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've mentioned that yet in this entire process. Yeah, I probably have, but that's how I got my transplant and everything. That the whole 23 or 22 a day, whatever it is, the suicide rate still amongst soldiers. Mm-hmm. Part of that reason is that the PTSD and the traumatic brain injuries didn't go away. It's that the VA finally started to come up with a way of addressing it more, and they really overhauled the VA a lot in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. Big difference. So and obviously I'm extremely grateful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
one of the truths is that there's always going to be a need for healing. And if you are a healer, I'm talking directly to you and your students, if you're a healer, at some point you have to step back from attempting to heal the world because there's a certain amount that we're allowed to do in the greater scheme of things. And then at some point we have to make sure we're doing our own work, make sure we're living our own life, and to essentially not martyr ourselves. And so most healers come with the desire to heal everybody as much as possible. I certainly did. And the balancing action of that is I'm happy to heal when it works, when it's in the flow, when I don't have to over effort and they don't have to over effort, and when the time is right. And so, and it's also critical to heal yourself. If you're choosing or trying to heal other people, you got to do your work, whatever that work looks like. If it's shadow work, if it's spiritual practice, if it's developing tools, if it's healing your own ancestral trauma, your own past life trauma, your own childhood trauma, your own I was an idiot trauma, then get on with healing that. Get on with healing that.
And there's no such thing as perfect, but as long as you're trying, you're still going. Yeah. And so absolutely. A couple of quick things here, and we'll wrap this up. David and I have spoken leading up to this about doing this session about the possibility of doing more. Now, whether that is, and I think I've all but invited you, and I think we've sort of mentioned it, maybe we'll have another session within this course itself on a couple of some other issues that you touched on. But then that perhaps we might come up with an entirely new thing of just the two of us. We're not exactly sure on what that would be, but I can tell by the synergy here today. And certainly if anybody wants to contact either one of us to mention anything in that regard, or to go to, say, my website, When in Raven, and get on the email list, of course, check our Facebook pages and all that stuff. Anyway, all I'm saying is we're going to be doing some more work together. I think this went really, really well. And there's no reason not to be doing it. It's what we'd be doing if I was in Athens.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a joy. And I'm grateful for the technology that lets us connect, even though it's, a couple thousand miles difference. So,
okay, now here's the crazy twist. Here's a crazy twist. All right. And I know you've heard me ask ridiculous type questions before, but somebody was talking about something with the environment and how, we need to heal the earth. And I get it. I get all that. And I'm not coming down on any side of the environmental debate. Yeah. But when it comes to healing the earth, I remember one time, back to Christy Gray, she was talking about how somebody was ranting and raving about something with pollution or whatever. And which surprised me, she so often surprised me with some of these things that she would say that were so out of character with the traditional mainstream sort of, new age spiritual, because she was in no way new age. She'd been doing this since the 70s. But it could be categorized as that, solstice ceremonies and all these things. But she said there's nothing that we can do to harm the earth, that the earth will always be able to repair itself no matter what we do to it. And, I thought a lot about that. I was like, even when we speak from this sort of egoic, oh, I'm going to heal the earth, really. So you're now telling me that, okay, we have this thing, Mother Nature, or whatever you want to call it, that created this, but yet you are going to be the ones going to fix it, right? this little bit. So, I mean, so that's an interesting thing that came up. And so I was thinking about that earlier, and I was thinking about the value of creation and experience. And so a little riddle came to my mind, and I guess it's a riddle, but so the question would be, what is the only thing that creates itself? What would it be? What is the only thing that creates itself?
There's probably a lot of right answers to this, but the one that's coming to my mind is that version of inspiration, that version of interacting with the muse, where there is a creative or generative force apparently from nowhere, and so it's kind of like when you don't need willpower in order to do something, when you're swept up in the energy of something. And so perhaps it might be inspiration.
Okay, there you go. That's good, because that's one step after what I'm talking about. And here's how I sort of came up with it. I came up with it, if you're thinking of, okay, so my answer is experience. Mm-hmm. Experience is the only thing that can create experience, right?
Right.
But the idea that you're talking about, the inspiration to do the experience, well, you have to experience that too. You have to experience the idea. You have to experience everything that brought you into this thing. So when you look at like the scientific reductionist way of causality, like our linear version of time, going back in time, well, it literally is impossible to go all the way back to the beginning, because something had to happen before that. Something caused that to happen. Everything had a cause. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you want to get out of the purely just, omnipotent God created the earth type of thing. And so in that way, it sort of built me up to this point to where there's no attachment you can put to any of the various causes, because nothing really causes, and you can't establish causality, because it's always the result of what just happened, which then spills into the next moment through this inspiration. But it's the experience of all of those things, the experience of what I think just happened, the experience that just happened, the experience of me thinking about it, and now the thing that I'm doing, I'm experiencing. But that one thing that is constant, that is only created by this process and creates these things, is experience. So that's interesting little side note. Maybe that's, maybe all that's, right,
ladies and gentlemen,
as I used to say,
that is officially a rabbit. That is a Steve rabbit hole. And every once in a while, he trips himself out when he starts thinking, and he plunges into a rabbit hole and says, "Join me." And my hope and my gratitude is that we don't always have to go. It's like, so, I mean, back when they legalized marijuana here and wherever, we can start hitting we can start practicing that medicine, and then we can ask the question, well, what happened before the Big Bang?
But not before we journey. Because that's the one thing I talk about.
Right. Now that would be a cool journey, trying to. Mythology already answers those questions. What came before the gods separated light and dark?
Well, those are great journeys. I was talking about the marijuana part. I was talking about never as clear mind as you can be. I talked about that in some other words, and the clear distinction between ayahuasca as an experience, which is awesome, but that is not journeying. Journeying is specifically what we're talking about in this course, and you want to be half drunk, stoned, tripping out acid or anything, doing that. Well, but back to the rabbit holes, as I used to say, when I think I probably told you this too, because I accidentally said it one time, because it was a similarly, I guess, oddball thought about experience being the only thing that creates itself, and the way I talked about it. I often say that it must have been all those 80s I did in the drugs But I was following the Grateful Dead.
Right.
Somehow things got a little twisted
Prep.
in there.
Mm-hmm. All right. On that note.
On that note.
On that note.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot again, and you'll be back in this series. We'll talk more about it. But
Okay.
this has been great, and it has been a lot of joy, and I'm very grateful for you being with us today.
A pleasure. A pleasure.
Adios, compadre.
Take care. Peace.
Okay, I am pausing.